Hello, welcome to Time to Say Goodbye. It is the 12th of June. Tyler, how are you doing?
Good, man. Yeah, totally fine. Back in Maine, the Great White North. Yeah, I'm doing all right. How
Is
about
that
you?
what people call the Great White
I
North?
think they technically call it Canada, but Maine is very white and it is also north.
Okay,
So,
I was gonna say the kids. Like,
fits the
what do you
bill.
mean? Are you talking about snow or are you talking about the people?
All the
Um,
above.
yeah, today we have a great show. It's actually very exciting. We just had a very, I don't know, I would say a very lively and fun conversation with Andrew Boryga. He is the author of a novel, Victim, which I think I said it at the end of the show, but I'm going to say it now. Look, if you like this show, or if you think that me and Tyler's commentary about race and class and privilege, etc., is interesting, then you should absolutely read this book. We think you'll love this book. Even if you think that Tyler and I are idiots, I think that you will find this book to be quite funny, right?
Yeah,
And
it's
so
hilarious.
we're really excited about that. And the reason why we had Andrew on was because we have been we want to do an episode about racial humor, racial satire, and some things that we've seen bubbling up in, I would say, the larger zeitgeist that might be indicators of the way in which that the conversations around race that we had in 2020, right, which were very earnest, many of them very righteous and good, right, but many of them quite cynical and stupid, right, have like there might be a correction going on, and that you can sometimes see it in things like the types of novels that get attention, or you can see it in the ways in which the types of writers that get highlighted. And we think that something is going on here. And the reason why I started thinking about this was because I had just sort of read the novel James, which Tyler reviewed back in the Atlantic. When was that? When did you review it in the
I
Atlantic? It
think it
was a
was the
while ago,
March
right?
issue, or no, it's the April issue, maybe. I
Okay,
think
so
it
it
came out
wasn't
in
it
March.
wasn't too long ago, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, but before we get all to all that, you want to talk about Caitlin Clark. Why do you want to talk about Caitlin Clark?
Well, I just, I followed Caitlin Clark in March Madness. I know very little about basketball. I watched all her games because she's amazing, but I keep seeing like people really mad at her on Twitter, and I cannot for the life of me figure out like what she has done or what the problem is. And you are a basketball dude, so I thought you could give me your. I would love to hear like what the problem is here because she's in trouble. I don't understand why, and I thought maybe you could provide the insight from basketball Twitter since I know that's your domain.
Yeah, that is my domain. All right, let me give this a try. Caitlin Clark. To answer your question, Tyler, Caitlin Clark is not really in trouble with most people. Caitlin Clark is in trouble with her some of her league mates in or colleagues in the WNBA, and she is in trouble with some people on social media. The scenario, as far as I can tell, is this, which is that in because the WNBA is a league that was not making that much money, did not have that much pressure on it from, say, sponsors or big audiences or anything like that, right? The league could sort of had a little bit more freedom to pick what it wanted to be. And starting in 2014, 2015 or so, the league became very interested in social justice issues. And in fact, for many years, the only way and time that you would actually hear about the WNBA was when it did something that was social justice related, right? You would not hear about the finals for a long time. I didn't even know who was winning the finals. Um, and then what had happened, and this is the part where I think that the conversation needs to be quite fair, is that even before Caitlin Clark, the level of play in the WNBA, some of the stars that went to the WNBA really did start to pick up. You had people like, I don't know, Elena Delle Donne or Candace Parker was the big one, right? Maya Moore, players who played with a lot of skill. This is not to say that the predecessors didn't, but it was definite evolution. It's like watching any sort of sport, right? You watch NBA in the 1960s, 1970s, even the 1980s, and then you compare it to now, the skill level is not comparable. And people who say it is are being delusional, right? Like it's in front of your eyes. You can see the product improving. So the WNBA starts getting this wave of skill, and that the high point of that skill revolution and the most entertaining player that anybody has watched is Caitlin Clark. Caitlin Clark comes out of Iowa, and uh, and now the problem is that there is a culture of the WNBA, right, which is that it's still clinging to a lot of the social justice message, right? And the social justice message in a lot of ways is very 2020. It's like very much like deferential. You must say things like white people should acknowledge their privilege, right? So this is a type of culture that Caitlin Clark has entered into. And since she is bringing so much attention to all of this, and because she refuses to do what Paige Beckers or Cameron Brink did, which Paige Beckers and Cameron Brink have both given long statements about white privilege and all, how it's different for them and how they should praise all of the people who came before them, many of whom were Black women. Since Caitlin Clark won't do any of this, like she is sort of seen as being suspect by that small group of people on Twitter who believe that these types of things are important, right? But within the league as well, I think that that has led to some consternation amongst some of the other players. Now, that's a very small subset of it, and that is a discourse of it. The reality of it, I think, the actual reason why she's getting a lot of friction is much more understandable, which is that, man, if imagine you like spent your entire life playing basketball and you were better than Caitlin Clark as a pro, and this girl comes in and everybody's like, "Oh, you should thank her. You should thank her." Which
Yeah,
is
yeah,
what a
yeah,
lot of people say. Like Stephen A. Smith said this. A lot of major media figures. Charles Barkley said this, right? It's not small people who are saying this on Twitter. These are major, major people being like, "You should thank your lucky stars. Now you get to fly private jets." From a personal dignity standpoint, which, as you know, Tyler, this is something that I always harp on a lot and I just think is important and a very underrated way in which people think. From a personal dignity standpoint, no, 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 no. This girl isn't even better than me. I just locked her up for the past 40 minutes. She had 10 points and turned the ball over 6 times and looked like a struggling child.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
You want me to thank her? She isn't shit yet, right? And so those images of people competing with her mixed with that narrative, right? The social justice sort of narrative has led to this completely toxic, weird, almost mutant product where people basically think that um, everything is because of the racial elements of it and everything is because of the social justice elements of it. And man, it is absolute, you know, cornucopia of takes for the media, right? Who right now are struggling because it's the summer and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
because the NFL hasn't started and the NBA finals and playoffs have been largely pretty boring. So they have nothing else to talk about. And so they
Other than
just,
reactionary Caitlin Clark.
yeah, they just talk about Caitlin Clark and race over and over and over and over again. Now, the one thing I will say is that the thing that you keep hearing is that the WNBA is a physical league. This is not out of the ordinary. Now, this appears to be true. The WNBA is a very physical league, and if you watch these games, there's things like basic steals, like which in the NBA is just like you take they're physical. It's like they're getting hit with two forearms and ripping the ball away, and I'm just like, wait, that's a foul.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But in the WNBA, it's not, right? And so the question is, um, Caitlin Clark getting hammered like this, I don't think it's because she's white. I don't think it's because all these girls hate her. I do think a lot of them hate her, but
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't think that I don't think the physicality is so abnormal based on the sort of baseline of physicality. But there is a question that the WNBA should ask itself, which is, do we want the league to be this physical? Because when the NBA was this physical, the product suffered, right? It didn't highlight skill. And the WNBA needs to basically ask themselves like that because they have a group of women coming through who are going to be coming after Caitlin Clark, who are so skilled and so good at basketball, at the things about basketball that people actually like to watch, right? People want a little bit of physicality. They don't want no physicality, but they don't want all physicality. Um, and should they set up the league for those women to succeed? And how will that be portrayed? Will it be like, oh, they changed the rules for Caitlin Clark, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
and my take, I think, out of all of this is that I agree it looks bad to basically change the rules for Caitlin Clark, but they should change the rules for Caitlin Clark
Yeah, yeah,
because
yeah, yeah.
they shouldn't just change it for Caitlin Clark. They should change it for Juju Watkins. They should change it for Malaysia Fulwiley. All these women who are coming through where I've never seen that level of skill before, and
Oh, it's
I'm
amazing. As like an
thrilled to
outside
watch it.
observer, it's
Yeah,
amazing.
I'm thrilled to watch it on a professional level as fully grown and developed athletes. So there, that's my coward take. What did you think?
10 out of 10, dude.
Too
Yeah. Now
late? What, did
I
it
do
go too
understand
long?
now what's happening.
Let's segue here to James, right? James is a book by it is Percival Everett's latest novel, and I wanted to talk about it just because I just picked it up and I started reading it, and I was really captivated by it. I think it's a work of absolute genius. I don't use the term lightly, but I was like about 20% in. I was just like, man, this is fucking great.
Yeah.
Right?
It's really, really good.
Like my brain was on fire reading it. And you reviewed it. So yeah, I just want to say, like, how'd you end up reviewing it? Like how did it go on your radar? Is it something where they asked you to do it, or is it something that you're interested in Everett beforehand? Like what's the process here?
Yeah, I'd written about American fiction, the book Yellow Face, and some novels by Brandon Taylor, and sort of written about what I called the tokenism expose, this like genre of literature, novels, film about like the publishing industry or Hollywood that is like centered on, and I think actually the novel we're going to talk about later in the show, Victim, also falls into this paradigm, which is like just centered on exposing the ways in which people of color are kind of commodified within publishing and forced to fit into certain molds. In American fiction, of course, is based on Everett's novel Erasure,
Right.
and so an editor at the Atlantic, knew I was interested in Everett and was like, "Hey, this is coming out. Do you want to write about it?" But yeah, I mean, it was amazing. To be honest with you, when they asked me to write about it, I mean, I said yes because I like Everett, but his novels are often sort of satirizing and skewering the expectation that like black writers write about black things. I mean, that's the whole premise of Erasure. And when I found out that James was going to be a retelling of Huck Finn, it actually made me really nervous because it was like it felt like something that a different kind of black novelist would do, like
Yeah.
retelling Huck Finn. And I was like, oh man. And it's like with Doubleday, he used to write for, I think it's Grey Wolf Press, a more indie outlet. And so it was his first book, novel with a top 5 publisher. And, I don't know. When I read the summary, I was like, oh man, I don't know how this is going to be. And it's brilliant. Yeah, like you said, I agree. It's like totally a work of genius, and really funny. I mean, one of the recurring bits, and this is not a spoiler, but one of the recurring bits in the novel is that the character James, who's, of course, the sidekick to Huck Finn in Mark Twain's novel, speaks in the Queen's English to other black people and slaves, and is just like, has a mastery of the English language and is citing Voltaire and like, constantly talking about philosophy. But then whenever he talks to white people, he just like adopts this sort of accent of a slave. It is great. It's super, super funny. I mean, it's very, very smart.
Yeah, just for the listeners, it is a retelling of Huck Finn from Jim's perspective, which I agree with you as a concept should be pretty DOA, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Especially from a writer as smart and as subversive as Percival Everett, where you would think, well, that's what kind of like you can imagine the terrible woke version of this book.
Yes.
It would be so bad. And like this genre is, I will say I like it. Like one of my favorite books is Grendel by John Gardner, right, which
Mhm.
is the story of Beowulf from Grendel's perspective. And much like this book, that book is very, very funny. Right? It's basically I don't know. It's like kind of like a Nietzschean nihilist novel about like how but Grendel is really depressed, right? Because he doesn't understand why he keeps doing this. And he's like, why do I, is basically the meat of the book is him going in and destroying the longhouse and like eating all these people, and then running back. And while he's doing it, he's like, what is my motivation for doing this anymore? Why do I keep doing this? And he's like bashing people's heads together and
Yo, keep eating
fighting
the
their lips
villagers.
off and stuff like that. It's really funny. But, this book, I don't know. It's like I think that the interesting part of it is it is aware of the bad version of it that could exist, and it subverts that, right? So it is like a
Totally. Yeah.
subversion of a subversion, and that's where it's interesting. Like the parts where he's like he has these conversations in his head with like John Locke, right? And like all these and like they're just very, very funny, right? Like and it
Hilarious.
was and the and then it becomes like a book that is really violent and is really and that's where I was like, oh, this is like one of the, I will just say, one of the best novels I think I've read in 5 years or something. It might be the best novel I've read in so long, just because it's so smart and it's so, it knows what you expect, and yet it doesn't just commit to the satirical ha ha ha, I'm gonna like poke my finger in your eye. I think this is also true of Andrew Boryga's book, who we
Totally.
interviewed, where like there is that part of it, which is just like, I know what you want. I'm not going to give it to you. I'm going to give you this. But here is also like everything around it that makes it important. And I'm not going to make it flat. Right. And for Percival Everett in this book, like you do get a history of the brutality of slavery. Like you do see um this specific time, which is right before the
Civil
outset of
War.
the
Yeah.
Civil War. Like you do see some of the ways in which things were talked about. And then you still have this relationship, right, which is the core of the book with and James and Huck. And yet, like, the funniest part of it always is that, like, whenever Percival Everett gets bored of exploring that, which it seems to be quite often, he just like invents these side quests for Jim where Huck just
Totally.
disappears.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And then James off doing something else. Like he's part of like a, he like the funniest scenes of that was like when he like joins a minstrel show,
Dude, it's so good.
and he
Yeah, yeah.
has to, I won't give it away because it's so funny what happens, but man, I love this book. So yeah, I wanted to I wanted to talk to you a little bit about it because I know that you enjoyed it as well.
No, and I mean, I think you're right to, I think Victim is doing something similar. We didn't talk about this with Andrew, but one of the things I admired about his novel that I really admire about James is that in Andrew's novel, the main character who's, a minority is not particularly sympathetic. Like he kind of sucks. And James is sympathetic in a certain way, and he's really like you understand why he does the things he does, but he's also the book is violent, sometimes in ways that aren't directly or necessarily easily understood as righteous violence, even as it's easy to empathize with the character. And yeah, I mean, it's just really, really impressive. I mean, James, it's satirical, it's really funny, and it offers a deeply humanized portrait of James without being saccharine or casting him in this sort of noble hero archetype that I
Right.
think a woker version of this book, to your point, would have like easily fallen into this really banal trap of telling a story about James that is saccharine and morally unambiguous, and in which James gets to have his final say, which he does in this novel, but it's much more complicated than that. I mean, it is really just masterful. Like I said, I was worried about it before reading it because I really do love Everett, and it felt like the kind of novel, just based on the summary, that would lend itself to selling out, and it has a lot of teeth. It really does not.
Yeah, how do you, like, the question that I think is in his mind at the center of it, which is one that I find myself also thinking about, which is like, how do you subvert the magical Negro narrative without committing yourself to a different type of magical Negro
Yeah,
narrative?
yeah,
And
yeah,
he just keeps flipping it in this book. And for me, at least as a reader, the mark of a master is when the book can go completely off the rails, but you understand that that was the plan, right? That
yeah.
there is a logic, and this book goes way the fuck off the rails.
Totally.
Like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
the second half is fucking crazy, you know? Like
Dude,
it's
it's
just like
wild.
um all sorts of shit happen that are not in Huck Finn. I'll just put it
Yeah,
that
yeah,
way.
yeah,
And like even like who Huck is changes, right? In a way
yeah.
that's crazy, right? And the whole thing is just woven through in this way. And it made me just think, look, we're in this moment right now where uh the publishing houses, in terms of what they have chosen to highlight, are choosing these types of satirical books, right? And Hollywood, in some ways, with my buddy Cord's movie,
Hmm.
American Fiction, has also said, okay, this is something that we're willing to explore. And it's interesting, one can tie themselves up in knots thinking about, well, why is that? Why is that? You know, like, what are they doing? Are we just, you know, is this just like the new wokeness is slight anti wokeness or whatever, right? But I will say that from a personal perspective, as the writer or as the film director, you can't really think about that type of stuff, right? Because you're doing the thing that you should do. And if you're responding to those trends and the thing you're going to do is shitty anyway, so, you know, it's kind of like useless. And we don't talk about shitty things. I mean, I think if you and I thought a book was shitty or something, we just wouldn't talk about it, right? So,
No, for sure.
um, for our guest, our upcoming guest, Andrew, for Percival Everett, for Cord, for a lot of these people, like they really are part of this moment right now, where it seems like there is a pushback in some ways to like Robin DiAngelo, Ibram X. Kendi, 2020. And it's been very interesting for me to witness. I have found it quite refreshing. I like all these books. I like,
Yeah, me too.
um, and I think that James, at least for me, was something where I was just like, if you had, when I was younger, when I was like 20, 21, 22, and I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do as a writer, I wish that this book had been around to just kind of show you exactly how liberated you can be while writing about about this stuff, because
Yeah.
he just goes nuts. So I was like, this is the, yeah, second half of the book is just like, that's like freedom if you can write
Yeah, yeah.
that crazy. So I thought it was pretty cool.
No, I think you captured it really well, which is that, and this is something I try to get across in my review. Like the novel really speeds up, and I think there's a way in which a certain kind of reader will be like, "Oh, it just like it kind of just ends in this like really sort of cataclysmic way." But it's clearly like the way in which it goes off rails is somehow deliberately really choreographed. Like it doesn't feel like he's lost the plot in any way. It's amazing, and I mean, even within the satire, I think it's the novel that I've read, or even, I mean, not just novel, the piece of writing that I've read that I think, in terms of like trying to depict and think about slavery, is really just, I mean, deeply impressive and eye-opening isn't the right way to put it, but I'll use that word. I mean, and this doesn't give too much away, but there's one of the settings in the end is in a house where they breed slaves, and it's that's the kind
Oh
of thing that
God,
you.
that's so brutal. Yeah,
Yeah, and you
yeah,
don't
yeah.
think about that, right? But like
Right,
that's that happened, and
right.
it's really I think because it's a satire and because it really quite deftly weaves this brutality alongside genuinely witty and a funny novel. I think it's effective in a way that I think like a novel that like did not have humor would not be, and it's like edifying and sort of almost pedagogical in a way that I think again a more performative sort of boilerplate version of this novel just wouldn't be. But you're right, we're in this interesting moment, and I think the thing that's exciting about some of these novels and films, whether it's American Fiction or Everett or Andrew's novel, I think in sort of the writing and magazine and online publication space, um, there's like the anti woke crowd and there's a woke crowd, and then it doesn't feel like things can get reductive very quickly. And I think all of these novels are both humanizing and I think fall outside of that easy binary and are not reactionary in any way, right? Like they're pushing back against a certain way of thinking and talking about race without falling into some kind of kumbaya colorblind trap either. Yeah, I don't know, but I agree it's an exciting kind of moment in fiction we're in, and I do love the racial satire thing that we have going on right now.
Yeah, more of it.
Yeah.
Publishing houses, especially. I mean, I thought the brutality you were talking about is so. It almost need like there are books about the Middle Passage and things like that that are the novels that are quite affecting, right? But they're told in a way of just unending brutality, right?
Mhm.
And sort of a way to find dignity or humanity within a scene of absolute horror and and oppression. And I think that those books are important. But I think that in terms of actually communicating the actual horror of it, that satire sometimes works. You know, that this type of book where it's at some point you're laughing and laughing and then holy shit, where are they now? You know?
Yeah.
And it's just such a hard thing to do as a writer. It is so hard. It is the hardest thing to do is to write a good, funny book. It's fucking impossible. The
Yeah.
easiest thing to do is write like a tearjerker about like, somebody who uh triumphed over adversity. Like that's quite easy, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I don't know. This Andrew's book, these books are actually quite inspiring to me as a writer because I want to do this shit, now.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
like my first novel I tried, but it's it's fucking hard, man. It's fucking hard. I like that's the thing I got. It's just like it's almost how like basketball players see Kyrie Irving or Kobe and they're just like I like him because he's doing like maybe the casual fan can't see it, but the moves that he's doing are just so incredibly
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
difficult. And I am a really good basketball player. I could never do that,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's how they sort of judge their peers. Writers also do that. And man, some of these books that are coming out now, I kind of feel that way. I'm just like,
Yeah.
could I do that? I think I'm a good writer, like, but could I do that?
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And then I see a lot of other stuff. It's like, I could definitely fucking do that,
Yeah.
but
Sure.
like, could I do that? I was like, I don't know, man. I don't know
No,
if I could
that's
do
funny.
that.
I mean, one of the things Andrew mentioned is, wanting to be a journalist and becoming a novelist afterwards. And I had you talked about being a novelist first and then doing this. And I wanted to write novels and that it just like it seems so daunting, And so I think there is something where it does feel like the like people that are doing one kind of writing really want to be doing the other kind of writing.
All right. Let's get to our conversation with Andrew Boryga.
We are thrilled to invite on Andrew Boryga to continue our discussion about racial satires. Andrew's writings appeared in the New York Times, the New Yorker, the Atlantic, and other outlets. And he's the author of a new book, Victim, that came out in March. Andrew, we usually give people the option of we can describe your book for you, or you can describe your book. What do you prefer?
Man, you guys are legends in this space talking about these issues. So I'd love to hear how you conceptualize it, and I can fill in anything if anything afterwards.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I'll let Jay say his 2 cents too. But as the title implies, the book is kind of a racial satire about the question of victimhood and the way that victimhood has attained a certain kind of currency, I think, in our media landscape. It centers a character, Javi. It's not quite a Bildungsroman, but it follows him as he grows up, then goes to college, and comes to realize that. Being a BIPOC, as they say, has if he plays his cards right, has some advantages. He's had a bit of a troubled life, but also he realizes that he can hyperbolize some of that in order to get attention and kind of launch a writing career. And it's really, I think, a biting satire of our media landscape. College admissions, higher ed. Yeah, I mean, how would you describe it, Jay?
No, I think that's right. I think it felt reading it as like, man, this really is very close to a lot of the stuff that me and Tyler talk about. And
Yeah.
so really excited to have you on the show
Totally.
because some of the stuff felt so familiar and it was cool to see it in a fictionalized form, right? Because I would say that since I started thinking about this stuff more intensely, I have not been writing fiction, but I think that me, let's say like 15 years ago would have absolutely tried to represent this in some way through fiction, because it actually is a more powerful way because it can take you through a narrative. It's not making like an explicit argument and just, in 1500 words or whatever. It's a novel length thing. And so I don't know. I felt like it was cool. I don't want to like we should be careful about spoilers because there's a
Yeah,
lot
yeah,
of
yeah.
stuff that happens in this
Yeah,
book
yeah, yeah.
where I was like, whoa, I did not expect that to happen. Right. And so it's not, I mean, I don't think that the book is like something where it relies on like a twist or something like that. But yeah, I'm just a little I don't want to spoil the book because I do think a lot of our audience would want to read it in the future. But is there anything that we missed here that you think that we should add to this description?
No, that was great. I think I think what Tyler was saying is perfect. It's this basically this kid who sort of realizes like this he has a fast track to success if he kind of pimps out his identity in this media landscape. And so that's a big theme, but also, there's like a friendship undercurrent as well, writing about the Bronx, the outer borough experience in New York City. I try to pack a lot into the novel. So, but what you picked up on, both of you, is definitely the biggest thing, and I'm excited to talk to you about it.
Yeah, I want to get a sense of this where I always want to know what compels people to write certain books, right? For me, when I wrote my novel, I think that I was really angry about a lot of stuff and I wanted to produce it in this manic prose. And that the stuff that I was angry about, I'm not angry about anymore.
Yeah,
However, I read back on it sometimes. I very rarely, but sometimes I read back on it and I understand why I wrote it that way and what was compelling it. Right. What was that for you? Right. Like, what was like? Because this is there's clearly a point of view here. Right. Like
yeah,
there's real anger in this book. I mean that. I mean that in a really. I mean that in a good way. Right. Like the flat version of this would have been just odd. Right. So yeah, let me know.
yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting you say that because I've had the same experience. The book is out now, but it was like I turned it in almost 3 years ago, and I got two kids now. Like I'm in a whole different mental space, so I'm not really working in the media as much. But when I was writing this novel, I had for like a decade been freelancing for a lot of different mainstream publications. I was a staff writer at some places, and I was really pursuing this journalism career. Trying to you know basically do some of what you guys are doing, to be honest. And I think you guys are doing it well. And but I felt that I just kept hitting these walls where it was like the path of least resistance was like to me to write these same types of stories about my traumatic Bronx upbringing, my Puerto Rican identity, like big social justice issues in the media, and sort of my take on it as a brown person or as a BIPOC or as a poor person or insert whatever. And and that was and a lot of that I enjoyed in the beginning, and I thought it was important. And everyone's talking about diversity and diverse voices, and I'm like, dope, this is great. This is about time, cool. But then it was like, okay, wait, this door open for me, and the other ones, like when I'm pitching anything else is different, it's like no callbacks, nobody no pretends like they don't even work with me, don't remember my name, like until some other shit happens and they want to like reach out to me again, like, oh, Puerto Ricans are in the news. What are you up to? And
Yeah, or
I'm
not
like,
even Puerto
oh, like,
Rican sometimes, right? They're
yeah,
like,
yeah, or just like any
yeah,
Latino, and I'm like, bro, like
yeah.
this is really different than my experience, like,
You have
and
any
so
thoughts on the Mexican elections or
yeah, and
something
I'm
like
just like, I don't fucking know. Like, I don't fucking know, bro. Like, so like
that?
that would happen over and over, and it just got really infuriating. And I think a lot of the impulse, when I finally landed on this version of the novel, because I had been playing with it for like that whole time, 10 years, it was more about this friendship story. But when I landed on this idea of like a version of myself who, instead of getting pissed off and like withdrawing from this sort of media world, which is what I did, somebody who leans into it and who's like, all right, you know what, this is what you guys want, I'm going to give it to you, and I'm gonna put a little spin on it, and I'm gonna, this is gonna be my path. I'm a hustler, and I'm gonna pull the wool over you. You don't even realize it, And to me, that was like a fun way to talk about some of these things, and also have a character who had agency and who like did I was tired of reading books where like the character of color was like so oppressed or like beat down by whatever forces, and I'm like, what, I wanted to see somebody kind of in control, even if what they're doing is not the greatest things, but they're making conscious decisions and they feel like they're the ones playing other people. um
Yeah, I had a question because, one thing I did pick up on in the novel is like the question of like the way in which this kind of writing can become boring, or
yeah, yeah,
formulaic. Like, your main character starts complaining that like, it's this like rote thing that has a formula and you can just like bang out these essays on, race based topics. I never had this so much with writing, but I had this kind of thing in academia where, I started teaching, not teaching, but I started my job as a professor in 2020, right after George Floyd. And, at the beginning, I mean, you said there was something exciting about this. And I think, initially, as we experienced, whatever people want to call it, the awakening, there was like definitely parts of it that were exciting. And then at a certain point, I realized in class as I was teaching novels and, talking with other people that, at a certain point, everything becomes a kind of find the racism treasure hunt when you're teaching, where it's like, okay,
Yeah.
here's this novel. Like, where's the racism? Or like, can we unpack like, X, Y, and Z? And it just got really, I got tired of it. And it didn't make me angry. It just kind of made me bored. And, so you're saying kind of something similar here. And then I think I can also see hints of that in your character. Was there a moment, you said this is kind of a imagining if rather than leaned out, you had leaned in. Was there a moment in your kind of work as a freelance writer, journalist, etc., where you started leaning out and you were like, all right, I'm done with this, or was it just more of a slow, gradual thing?
Yeah, it was, the 2020 definitely played a role. Things just got so crazy and heated. And, at the time that all that was happening, my son was about to be born. So he was born July 2020 and COVID was happening. It was just like a crazy time. And I was still a staff writer for a local paper here in Florida. And I still did keep reporting. I ended up working for the Daily Beast for a little bit, which, warped a lot of things.
Yeah.
It was like, so it was about, yeah, it was like, I can't say there was a specific incident or something. It was more just like I kept confronting these things and I kept seeing that this was like, I was just seen as like the diverse reporter. And, I'd often be in newsrooms. This newsrooms have a lot of problems with race, but they also have a lot of problems with class, and especially these online outfits. I'd often be in newsrooms where like, even if they're from New York, they've never been to the place like the Bronx, or like if they go to Brooklyn, they stay in certain places in Brooklyn. They don't go hang out. They can't go walk around East New York or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, and so there's, I just kept confronting that, and I guess it was more of like a slow slide of like, just I'm tired of this shit, and I got kids now, and like I want to talk about this stuff in a way that I felt I couldn't do that. In like a nonfiction piece. And I also felt like kind of what Jay was saying in the beginning, like an essay, I'm trying to hit you with a point, or I gotta like, there has to be something to take away. And I had big questions that I didn't necessarily have answers to. I just wanted to like raise them and poke some fun at all this shit that was
Yeah,
going
yeah,
on. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Like, and I
It's a
felt like,
very funny novel.
thank you, man. I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's funny, especially look, I got we'll talk about it in the end, but the
Yeah,
parts about like being an online writer, which is obviously something that Tyler and I both
for
have some
sure.
experience with. Man, that was some dark shit. I was reading it last night, and I went to my wife. I told my wife was sitting nearby, and I was like, "Man, this is making me, this is making me like it's funny, but I know that I am the joke here, and it is pretty crushing." I was like, "Fuck!" I did just sit around and spend 6 hours reading the mentions about my fucking article that nobody actually read, and I'd get mad at like three of the fucking tweets. Yeah, well, I want to like. Did you set out when you were like deciding to be a writer? And I know that
Yeah,
Javi in the book has his own arc about that. He has his own impetus. Basically, at some point, he learns that you can get $100,000 for a book advance, and he's just like, that seems like a lot of money. Maybe I should
yeah.
write a book, right? Now this is a novel, right? And I understand like how if it's very different. But did you set out wanting to be a novelist? Like, did you want to write fiction, and then you fell into journalism? That's sort of what I did, right? Like, I wanted to be a
Interesting.
novelist, and then I just like journalism was just a lot easier for me to break through in. And then at some point, I was a journalist. But I still sometimes think about myself as a novelist. But
Yeah, you
yeah,
wrote a
what was
novel,
that? What
bro.
was that path for you?
It was actually the opposite. Growing up in the Bronx, like I didn't like I read, but I didn't even know what does a novelist do? Like who is I didn't know anybody that was like a novelist or like this. So I was like, that's a weird job, like a drug dealer felt like I could like conceptualize that, but a novelist, I was like, I don't understand what that is, right? But like, but a journalist, I could just because I'd take the bus, this long ass bus ride to high school every day, and I'd always buy the Daily News and the New York Post, and I read them both, and and I see the columnist name and like read about the Mets and the Yankees and whatever the trades and all this shit, and so like. I was like, okay, like this is writing, and they're making a career out of it. So that was really my first kind of love. And then it wasn't until I got to college where we started like analyzing novels, and really, it was actually funny enough, I wasn't really exposed to writers of color, like modern writers of color working, until I went to college. I was exposed to like a Junot Diaz, for example, who, like, I read his work and I was like, okay, like I recognize these people on the page. I could write about people like that. I
Yeah.
had everything I had read before that. It was dope, and I loved it. Like, I loved On the Road, and I tried to write like a bootleg version of On the Road
Yeah,
at
me
one point.
too.
Yeah, yeah, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm going at the gas station, and I'm like waiting for my car, and then I was like, I don't even know how to fucking drive. I don't have my driver's permit. Like, I've never left my block. Like, I don't barely know Manhattan to this day. Like. So I was just like, well, the fuck am I write On the Road? So I kind of gave up, and then it was until I read these other writers, I was like, okay, there's this other tradition that I could actually enter into and like write about my community and this like Latino identity, Puerto Rican, New Rican identity, and New York City in this different way. And so it was the second thing that came to me, but then it quickly became like my real love. But journalism, like you said, was, this is like 09, 10, 2011, 12. Like, it wasn't completely collapsed. It was collapsing, but not as bad. There was still like a pathway where you can get like a job and like pay your bills and live reasonably well. So I kind of leaned into that and just like worked on my book on the side this entire time. And slowly it just kept kind of pushing its way to the forefront, where I was like, nah, this is really, I just need to go all into this, because I think I'll be allowed to explore the things I want to explore in this realm, not necessarily in the journalistic realm.
Yeah, that's interesting. That is around the time when I came up too, '09, 2010. And it did feel at that point that the places that had some money and reach were interested in hiring different types of writers.
Yeah,
And some of that was, racialized in some way, right? They're like, let's go get I don't know, with your example, it's like, let's get some Puerto Rican kid from the Bronx, right? Or for me, it's like, let's get an Asian dude, right, to come and write about this stuff, and let's expand, because the internet is about the outside world. But, as you mentioned it, at first it's awesome. You're like, that's sick. I get a job. Oh my
yeah,
God. Like, I got paid $2 a word. Like, like, I remember the first time I got paid $2 a word. I've never felt more rich in my entire life.
yeah, man.
No, seriously, that was the richest I've ever felt. I was just like, whoa. I just looked at the check and I was like, what the fuck is this check? um, and then at some point you just kind of realize what the game is, right? And I'm with you. It's not sudden. It's not like you have an epiphany moment, like, like you're fucking in the Dubliners or some shit, where you're just like, okay. You just kind of realize that, oh, the last 5 things they've asked me to do are the exact same thing,
Yeah, yeah,
and then you're just like, well, I always had this moment, man, where I'd be like, actually, I'd be both offended by the fact that they asked me, and then I would think about it, and I'd be like, but I am interested in writing about this thing.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's good. Yeah,
I think that is a dope
I'm mad, but
idea
I
that
am
I
gonna
would
do
like to do. But
you
I'm
got me.
offended. I'm offended you fucking asked me.
I should have had to pitch you this idea I wanted to
Oh man, that's funny. Yeah.
do. One of the things that you get at, this you mentioned class, and this novel seems to like think about class and class diversity, particularly among folks of color, in really interesting ways. We encounter a number of different characters of color who come from different class backgrounds, and there's one moment where your Javi's meeting with a guidance counselor before he gets to college, and this is where he has this kind of realization that he could actually go to a good college, if he played his cards right. And his guidance counselor, Mr. Martin, gives him this whole spiel about like hardship and emphasizing hardship, etc. And Javi thinks to himself, the only problem with what Mr. Martin was saying was that none of the words he'd used to describe me lined up with the words I would have used. Poor, underserved, from a tough place. I had never thought of myself in those terms. My neighborhood wasn't as nice as the Upper East Side, yeah, but I had a big apartment, my own room, food, decently fly clothes, a good mom, a free Metro card. Life wasn't all that bad. And one of the things that you get at in a kind of productive way is there's this sort of like ideal strata for like writers of color writing about hardship, which is like folks who grew up like really really hard mostly don't end up in places where they can write, right?
Yeah, yeah,
But then also like folks who grew up really really wealthy also aren't assigned to the hardship beat. So it is this kind of like middle layer of like grew up hard but not too hard, but then put in this position where you have to perform some kind of like down on your luck authenticity, that I found like really interesting, and it seems like an occurring thread that comes up throughout the book. But I guess one of the questions I had is, I was a college admissions tutor for a number of years when I was in grad school. And a thing I found and thought about a lot was kids always feeling like they had to perform trauma in their essays, right? Like, and feeling like they're supposed to write about hardship.
yeah,
And there's a way in which part of me wants to say that's like fine. What's wrong with that if you've had a hard life, etc. But then there's this other way in which there's something perverse about it too, where these elite institutions are constantly sucking out like these vampiric hardship experiences from
yeah,
people and kind of encouraging them to play it up a little bit. Like I remember one kid I worked with in particular who felt like, he's a black kid, and he was like, I feel like I'm supposed to pick the hardship essay to talk about for my writing prompt, and he was like racking his brain for like an example of like racialized hardship. And he settled on an encounter with the police that was like not a negative encounter, but was just kind of one of these ambiguous ones, but he's like, I feel like that's what I'm supposed to write about. Do the title of the novel is Victim. And I guess I just, there, Javi's had like a legitimately hard life, but like
yeah.
not hard in the way that others seem to expect from him. And I'm wondering if you could just say a bit about like the title and this question of like compulsory victimhood that people that are in our line of work and who are brown seem to get kind of slotted into in one way or another.
Yeah, no, I love that reading. I mean, I think, it's like a pressure to commodify kind of your experiences in some way, and like even separate them. And it's like, all right, yeah, I got stopped by the cop that one time. And like, was it, was it good enough to write about? Like, is it going to impress them enough? Or is that like, and like even that exercise is so fucking weird, like that's just a weird thing to do about your own life experience. And especially to do it for like these institutions that are going to just like in a school evaluate your ability to perform at a college level, but then in a journalism institution, like whether you're going to be on the front page or not, or you're going to people are going to read your work. Like, so, I wanted with the title Victim. I loved it when I landed on it. One, because it was like, felt like it was jarring. Like people would read it and be like, what is that? Who, and then it also, to me, it's like, who is the victim here? I don't like, and that's an open question. Like, is Javi the victim of like the game that he learned and then try to play and kind of see what happens if you read it, right? Or did the people that, instead of making things up, the stuff that he's writing, are those people who actually lived through that stuff the victims, and, or, yeah. So like, it felt like a way to get at all of that. But I think what you're getting at, like, it's this weird place that I found myself in, kind of like Javi, like from the beginning when I first entered college admissions cycle stuff. Like, I was fortunate. I had won some like underprivileged minority scholarship stuff, and then I had these counselors who were assigned to me and helped me out sometimes. And like I was a track runner like in high school, right? And I was like, I'm gonna go to any school that pays me some money to run track. I'm wherever you are, I don't care, I'll go, right? My mom can't pay, like that's what I'm gonna do. And so I was going to write an essay about track, about running and waking up in the morning and being tired and running and, whatever. And then they found out, like I didn't grow up with my dad. I had like younger sisters I took care of. And I had hardships and stuff. And they're like, yeah, like that running stuff is cool and all, but like that other thing, like,
Wait, what did you say? Can you go back?
Yeah, yeah, wait, hold up. Wait, your dad is weird. Like, and so like, and but it's weird because again, the why I want to write a novel is because like, I don't really feel bad about what like they were right. Like I ended up going to
they
Cornell.
were right. That's
I
the
got
thing,
into
man.
Cornell. I got into Cornell.
Yeah.
Like when I was 18, there was no way I thought I was gonna go to Cornell. No, my friends, my mother, nobody thought I was gonna go somewhere an Ivy League school.
Yeah.
And so, it did work. So it's like, and at the time I was just like 18, so fuck it, I'll do it, fine. And I wasn't like lying. I wrote the story it was just more compelling or whatever. But It wasn't the one I had initially set myself on. And but as I got older and was writing more in these spaces, I realized like that exercise kind of kept happening. Like, oh, you want to write about like I remember when Bad Bunny first came out. I was like, yo, this guy is interesting and good. And they were like, yeah, but this is Spanish. Nobody knows what he's talking about. It's reggaeton, whatever. Like, couldn't even say it right. And they're like, like, what about that hurricane though? Like, everyone's still so sad, like. So like
What
it just
about
it just kept coming up again and again, and I was just like, man, what the fuck. So I thought the title was a way to like get at all of those feelings, and especially from the perspective of Javi, like a person of color, like how are you a victim, are you not, and how that term can be really fluid, depending who you're talking to, what you're talking about.
Yeah, also something you said at the beginning that fiction helps with, right, is that you can give it agency. It doesn't have to be one note, because you have a whole book and a person and a narrative to flesh this out against. And that was, yeah, I found that to be really interesting because, I would not say that Javi is a particularly likable narrator, right? Like
Yeah.
he's like, I mean, he has a friend, Gio, who is much more, I think, traditionally likable in some ways as a foil, like somebody who lives his life with a lot of the dignity that Javi seems to not really care too much about. But it's hard to blame him because, as you said, like the thing that happens at the beginning of the book to him is quite bad. It's not like this guy has no problems. He's got
Yeah,
some
yeah, yeah.
problems, and there's this line in the book that I liked. It's one line, and I thought it was pretty great in explaining this. Is you say that, or he's speaking. He says, "I became this mouse of a person," right? And I thought that was really evocative and good because it really describes a lot of what happens when you go through this, which is that I guess I think about this stuff not in terms of pragmatism, but just in terms of like what it happens to people psychologically when they submit to this type of stuff. Um, and I do think that there's like a canceling out and there's like a smallness that comes with it, right? You sort of take away a lot of the things that are meaningful to you and what used to be who you were, and then you kind of reduce it down to this small thing. And I don't know, I thought that was a really wonderful way to describe it. And I just thought that some of the characters in the book, especially Anais, his girlfriend,
Hmm.
are just like they're familiar to me and Tyler,
Yeah,
like we
yeah,
get it, but
yeah.
I'm really curious to see how like like a kind of standard white media person who read this would confront this because I don't think they're quite as familiar with it. But I'm just saying, I talked to Tyler a bit about this. And I was like, well, so this stuff is very resonant. It's
Thank you,
like
man.
I feel the smallness part of it. I felt it too for a while, where I was just like, man, I never thought about this shit when I was growing up, and now I am. Why do I think about it now? Why do I
Hmm.
think about myself as this victim? Why do like, questions about shit like intergenerational trauma and stuff like that? I was like, yeah, my parents like grew up in a war zone.
Hmm.
My grandparents, fled a country. A whole bunch of my relatives are most likely dead. And I was like taught to think about it that way, but I never did before. And that part of you is like, you should think about yourself that way. Obviously, you should know your history. You should know
Yeah,
about
yeah, yeah,
colonization, American empire, everything like that. But then you just kind of get locked into this mindset and you have this thought like, all right, but like, come on. You know?
yeah.
How much shit can I blame on this?
Yeah, 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 exactly. Like, yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, how much is this accounted? How much does this determine
Right,
my
right.
life? It's yeah, and I don't know, there's no easy answer to it, but I kind of wanted
No,
to
it
just
was
throw it up in
it,
the air.
it was cool. I felt like like have people gotten mad about it?
I've gotten some like I thought it was gonna go over a lot worse than it has, to be honest. Like when I was writing it in 2020, I was like, this might be the last thing I write,
Yeah.
Like, I was like,
It's hilarious that you're writing it in 2020, right?
yeah,
It's
yeah.
so funny.
It would make a lot more sense to be writing it now, but you were
Yeah,
like
yeah.
in the middle of like Robin DiAngelo and give them
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
and
Well,
you
I
like,
was seeing all this. I'm like, what the fuck is this shit, bro? Like, this is insane. Like, who are these people? And why are people taking them serious? And I don't know. So anyway, like, but at the time I'm writing, I'm like, this is not like this is really different from what I'm reading, and it was making me excited to keep writing it, but I didn't
Yeah,
know how
yeah,
it was
yeah.
going to go over. And because of that, I did think that the response would be very different. It's mostly been positive. I think there's been people who didn't necessarily get it. Like I think a lot. There's a big swath of people who don't understand that it's like supposed to be funny and satirical and like poking fun at things. They think I'm just like I don't believe that any of these like big issues actually exist or something. Like I'm
oh
just
yeah,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
I just like went through my life and I never had any trouble and and that none of the racism isn't real. Like which I don't know how you read that and get that, but that's been out there. And then there's also been what's been more interesting and funny to me is like I find myself in the middle of like people saying, well, this is going to undermine like progressive causes, and you're like almost like you're exposing the game, like like shut up, And then there's the other side where it's like this is gonna be, like the right wing people will be like, this guy is just a shill, like he's like, another big five, diversity, pawn or whatever. So it's funny, like that both sides are kind of a little bit angry, but they're completely polar opposites. And I actually really like that because, like, to me, I'm like, all right, I think I did my job. If like I feel like I'm somewhere, in the grayness, and so I think the people who appreciate it have seen that and like appreciate it as well. But yeah, nothing crazy to be honest. But I also have a high tolerance and bar for that stuff. Like my own family will like flame the shit out of me on a daily basis and friends. So it's like you gotta
Yeah.
really like, hasn't been anything crazy like that.
Yeah, there's a line in the novel where Javi is like thinking about all the hate mail he gets that's really funny.
Yeah.
Where he's like, I get it worse from my mom. They like send him, they say a bunch of terrible things about him and he's totally unfazed. It's great. Um so it sounds like you started writing this in 2020. Was the did you get any pushback from like agents or publishers or anything like that, where like, or were because I think like, the way that kind of like general public thinks about publishing, whether that's like books or magazines or online or whatever, is that there's just like this cabal of people that decide what the
Yeah.
correct
Yeah.
opinions are at any given
Yeah.
time, and that
Yeah.
they just like strangle to death anything else. And there's like elements of that that are true, and then elements of that that really aren't. But it sounds like you started writing in this at the like peak sort of Kennedy D'Angelo race panic that we were having in the 2020s. Did you get pushback from people, or did people like were people like, oh no, I get what you're doing here, like let's do it?
Yeah, so actually, my agent and stuff I had gotten previously because I was writing it the whole time, and like she had read a different version of it, and I was slowly moving toward this like identity commodification theme, but like playing with it differently. I think the premise of the current book, where he's like a journalist, kind of like running with this stuff, I landed on that in 2020, but my agent was already kind of interested in that idea, like a person of color writing about like feeling like their identity has been, they have to perform it in some way for like, opportunities and whatnot. I think though, yeah, like I didn't really encounter a whole lot of pushback. I think, I mean, I don't know what the other houses she submitted to said. I didn't really ask. I was just like, let me know when somebody wants to talk and they're cool, and they want to talk about it. But that process actually kind of went quite quickly. Like Doubleday, the publisher, was interested pretty quickly, and I think this was 2022, so I think the timing was also right.
yeah,
Like that book, Yellowface, had like about I think it was
right,
about to come out, or maybe
yeah,
had
yeah,
just come
yeah.
out already. Cord Jefferson was the movie wasn't out yet, but I think people already knew he was adapting it and maybe like doing this type of thing. And these are things that I had no knowledge of either. I was writing in my own kind of silo, but it came, I think, at the right moment where we were all sufficiently, as a society, kind of like we went a little crazy 2 years ago. Like, right? Like, can we talk about that? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
like we said some things, we did some things. That was a little weird, right? Like, let's maybe chill a little bit. And I think it kind of came in that moment. Whereas I think if I was submitting it in 2020, I don't think I think it would have been a no-go. I
Oh
don't
yeah,
think.
definitely. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's an
like
interesting moment, right? Because what we're talking about more broadly on the podcast, but is because we want to talk about Percival Everett and James, his new book, and um, the larger. This book is every book that's published is not like they don't stand alone. Obviously, right? There are books publishing works kind of in mimicry. It follows certain trends. That doesn't
Mhm.
mean that the writers write to the some of them do, but like, those writers tend to not write particularly interesting books. But um what do you make of this right now where there are a lot of satirical racial things, right? You talk about Cord's movie, right? American Fiction, your book, Yellowface. Percival Everett in general has become a literary star in a way that he wasn't before. Paul Beatty, who has always
Yeah.
been writing this type of stuff. Paul was mostly ignored for many, many years, and then the sellout. Actually, I think it predated this, and it was big for him. But he has a different book out now. Like, what do you think accounts for this? Because I've been thinking about it too. Because I love all this stuff. I think that it's
Yeah.
totally necessary, and I feel like it's almost like a correction to a lot of the
Mhm.
ways in which race was discussed, basically in the 2000s and 10s, and then it all culminates in 2020. And like you said, I'm not saying the protests or anything like that about this. I'm just talking about the way in which like the media started talking
Yeah,
about
for
and
sure, for sure.
corporations started talking about
Yeah,
race
yeah, yeah.
in this way that was just so performative and kind of like, even if you wanted to support it overall, it kind of made your skin crawl a little bit if you weren't white. You know what I mean? Like, or if you
Mhm,
thought
mhm.
about it a lot, you're just like, oh,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
like, do we really need to sit with a bunch of people and talk about white privilege all the time? Like, I have no interest in ever talking about that shit, with people that I don't really know, right? Especially people I work with,
Yeah,
where
your
you're just like, why don't
coworkers.
you sit around and have a conversation about like the ways in, or like, Jay, what is your relative privilege as an Asian person? It's like, I would rather not have this conversation,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
why do we have to do this shit? And
Yeah.
then now we have all this stuff that feels like it's a corrective. I think that your book is quite biting in that way, right? And it's not a kind book to this stuff, I would say. Like, and I don't think it should have been, right? Like, it's not. I think that the people who read you as a pure reactionary are completely wrong. Like, it's
Oh,
like,
totally.
if you can't read this book and see that this person does actually think racism exists, but maybe we should talk about it in a little more sane and honest way, then whatever, that's their fault. But yeah, what do you make of this? What do you make of this moment right now?
This like bubble right now.
Yeah, I don't even know if it's a
Yeah.
bubble, but it
Or
feels
whatever.
like there's
Yeah.
like a correction going on or something. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
I
Yeah.
mean, I think there's been just like a collective fatigue, I feel like in a lot of ways. And I know that for me, like I said, I was excited that all these things were happening. I was excited, like obviously not excited that George Floyd died, but like I was excited that there seemed to be a moment where we were all kind of like, yo, like policing is fucked up. We should probably do something. Yeah, we should do something. Everybody was like, yeah, we should do something. And then like nothing happened, and like it all went to shit kind of. And so I was excited about all that. And I think like it just kind of went out of hand, and like you said, the way that the language around it for me, I'm a writer as well, like it just felt so performative. It felt so these corporations coming in and like basically that's their next buck, like this is the hot thing and we're going to capitalize on it. And I think people sort of started to realize that and are maybe fatigued and kind of looking for something a little different. I think that writers of color like myself, who were maybe excited early on about a lot of these things, have sort of like seen enough to realize, okay, this is actually like a little bit of a sham, like what's going on here.
Yeah, it's a
You
dead
know,
end, man. I
it's a
mean, it's
dead
not
end.
a
Like it's
yeah.
like, yeah, like
Or you're limited. It's
it's
it's like a
limited.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think for me, honestly, the most important thing was that lens of like, oh, oppressor, oppressed, you're just, victim or whatever. Like it robs the agency of like real people, and individual choices and the nuances of people. Like, to me, that's what real diversity is. Like we have two kids in my novel from the Bronx that are completely different, took different paths in life. Geo, a lot of people love Geo. Geo is like a criminal. Geo goes to jail. He's selling drugs. He's in a gang, but he comes out and
I
you
like
actually end up,
Geo.
yeah, a lot of people love Geo. I love Geo too. And it's like, but it's like if you met these two people or you saw them on paper, like one is supposed to be, better than the other, right? And so I don't know. Like I think that we've just reached this point where people want to hear like different stories, even though there's a machine built around the other type of story. I think that's some things that like challenge that narrative a little bit are starting to get noticed in the way that they might have been ignored maybe a few years ago because it just wasn't the right timing. Things were, bubbling. But you talked about Paul Beatty. I mean, I love Paul. He's a huge influence to me, and like, he's not like a national bestseller or whatever, but he won the Booker Prize, and the Sellout were in 2016 was another one of these like turning point moments. I think where Obama's leaving, Trump's coming in. What the fuck's going on? And his book hit at that right moment too. So I feel like there's kind of waves of this stuff, and I guess just kind of coincided right now, and we'll see. But I just hope it results in more interesting art. As an artist, I just hope it results in more interesting books, and I think we're seeing it already in like television. There's a lot of interesting TV that in some ways it's further ahead than like the novelistic realm in some ways. So.
Yeah, the kind of standard, hey, feel sorry for me, my life sucked,
Yeah,
because of racism story doesn't really. I think it has a lot less purchase now, which I think
yeah,
it's a good thing, like
yeah.
it's
We've
not
seen a lot of that already.
it's so flat and it's I don't know, as a writer, as a person who's interested in literature, obviously, novels, I just have always found it so boring for the same reasons that you think, but also I think are kind of explored and really interesting. My favorite, I will say, the favorite decision that you made in this book that I love is that Javi is kind of a bad writer.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
I love
Yeah.
that shit. Because there's a version of it where he's like a maestro at these
Talented.
Yeah. Yeah.
oppression stories, but you're like, no, actually, his stuff kind of his
It's
stuff kind of
terrible. Yeah.
it
Yeah,
kind
it's
of
like a little bit
sucks.
Drac. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
even by the standards of like being, like kind of the simple narrative, it's like not very good. And
No, no, no.
his editors are always like, can you make this a little bit better? And then he like wields the power of like public
Yeah,
opinion against them
it's
and
you're colonizing my writing.
accuses them of
You're right.
racism
Well,
and shit.
oh
Man.
god. One question I have for you is, and I think it's something I think about a lot. I'm sure it's, I would guess it's something Jay thinks about, which is that, I think, there are people that do go the like Javi route, which is like they're
Mhm.
going to lean into this, and then there's like another group of kind of minority writers, in which I think Jay and I and other folks get slotted into, which are like the kind of dissident minorities from the progressive race
Yeah.
consensus. We're still on the left, but
Heterodox.
like, yeah, exactly. And there's one thing that often occurs to me is that either you're active or reactive, right? You're like actively participating as a minority in this like particular kind of performative race discourse, or you're like get slotted into the reactive camp that is like not doing that. But in either direction, there's a way in which like race is still being commodified, whether
Yeah.
you're like one of the dissident people or one of the good minorities that are playing along. Do you think there is space for minority writers to like write about issues that are not just narrowly about identity, and particularly not like I think there is some room for that within like journalism, but it does feel to me there's like a lot of pressure, not as a novelist but as like an outside observer, on novelists in particular, minority novelists, to like write about race, whether that's like in the way that you do or whether that's in a sort of more saccharine way,
Mhm.
but do you think there's like room for like moving out of that active or reactive, dissident or willing participant box? Or do you think it is like there is still an expectation, even when you're pushing against the grain, that minority writers write about race?
I fucking hope so because I don't want to write another one of these types of things. Like I feel like I wrote like this book. I wrote it because I needed to write in reaction to what I was seeing, and I felt so boxed in. But I'm really hoping that whatever I work on next, which I'm working on it now, and it's like more about fatherhood and masculinity and things, and like important topics, but not really identity, in this type of way. So I'm really hoping that that's the case. That like my gamble is like my bet is actually true, and that people are not gonna be like, nah, just write victim part two. And I'm like, no,
Tell us about the hurricane. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, no, right, like no. you know yeah, so I don't know. I mean, I really hope that that's the case. And I think that I think we see some signs of it. There's a lot of novels that I've seen lately about like relationships, and dating, and like even like queer relationships and like these, which is like a whole new direction as well. Polyamory and all these things going on, which is like to me, I'm like, okay, it's interesting, but like at least it's different, right? It's
Totally.
something
Yeah.
different. And to me, that's dope. Like because I agree, like there's a lot of us who tend to write about identity, whether we feel pressure to do it or literally people are telling us we have to do it, or we just feel like, I think in a lot of cases, we probably feel like that's the only way. Like kind of like I was feeling as a journalist, like there's a path of least resistance, and you really want to get published by one of these
Yeah,
big
yeah,
places, like
yeah.
Mhm.
you're going to go down that path. A lot of people are going to go down that path, and it's kind of hard not to in a lot of cases. So yeah, but I'm hoping that that's the truth, because I really felt like when I was writing, I'm like, I'm just leaving it all on the line here,
I know you
saying
get
everything I
one.
gotta
I think you
say.
get one of these. The book
Yeah.
actually reminded me of like Bright Lights, Big City in a strange way.
Oh,
The first Jay
yeah, yeah, yeah,
McNamee
yeah,
book.
yeah,
And it was funny that you talked about the second book because his second book was like about kung fu or something or
yeah,
karate. He was like,
yeah.
I'm not doing Bright Lights, Big City 2. And then he wrote a book about karate, I think. And then he
Yeah.
wrote Bright Lights, Big City 2.
He was like, fuck.
But yeah, yeah. Or Chang Rai Lee wrote that. Like
Yeah,
he wrote a couple books that have like
yeah,
no Korean people in it, which I found to be interesting. And then you had the same sort of tired but very true conversation about, well, are you just doing that because what you don't want to, are you more cucked by the white people now
yeah,
because you're
yeah,
like,
yeah,
you're like, no, I'm not gonna put any Koreans in this because I don't want to be put in that box. But yeah, it was I don't know, it was I wanted to talk a little bit here about the okay, so I don't think it's giving too much away, but Javi
sure,
becomes like a journalist and he writes for a publication that will feel familiar. I don't know if it's like a synthesis of a lot of different publications, but it did remind me a lot of a publication that I used to work for, and
yeah,
it was like and he has an editor and he starts he becomes kind of Twitter famous. And man, I gotta say, you wrote the darkest vision of being a journalist I've ever read. Like of being like this specific type of journalist who mostly is starting out writing things online. All the cachet they get, because Lord knows they were not paying us very much back then,
yeah,
is through social media love, and yeah, like I mean, just like I don't even really have a question. I just want to tell you that it hurt my soul in a lot of ways. Like, I could still identify myself in that. I was like, I
yeah, yeah,
still do some of this shit. I'm like 15 years into the game. It's like I still do the shit. And like every time I do it, I'm just like, just stop. You don't have to do this anymore. But it's kind of it just gets so hardwired into you.
yeah. It's
And then the
addicting,
funny
man.
shit with you is that like you basically dramatize it to the book's end, which I won't give away. But it like kind of takes him to a place where you know, it's just kind of shocking and also very funny. But yeah, it was a I think there's a sort of side thing in this book where it's just like you should get the fuck off the internet.
Yeah,
Type of
Totally.
a
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
thing.
yeah, 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 yeah. No, that was like a lot of ways, Javi is like this alter ego, right? Of like this person I could have been or whatever. And a lot of that writing was from a period where I felt like that. Well, I didn't have that level of cachet or anything. I like nowhere near it, but I wanted it so bad. and like it would get me mad that I didn't have it, or people wouldn't read my stuff, or I didn't have like the fucking blue check mark, when it was like cool, and it was like, how the fuck do you get that shit? People would get it and like, why did he get it? Like,
Fuck that
like
guy.
fuck that guy, man. Like, I want the blue check mark. Who do I got to talk to? Like, and so, there was a moment in my life where a period in my life where I cared a lot about that shit. And that was probably like the most unhappy that I was like in recent memory, like the last, decade or whatever. Cause I was like so focused in this online world that like, there's some genuine love and stuff, and you make relationships and things like that. Like Tyler, we met on Twitter. I was just loving his stuff, and I was like, oh, we talking. So you get to meet interesting people and have conversations, but there's also like there's a moment where that can be like almost subsume your real life and your like real connections and your real like offline version of who you are and like what makes you happy and fulfilled. And so I have went through this process where I had to like really untether. A lot of it had to do with just becoming a parent and being like, I have to take care of a human being now. Like, like
Yeah.
I don't have time for this shit. And it helped a lot because now I can use Twitter and I don't feel that pressure anymore. I can just like tweet about random shit and then not, you know. So but yeah, I tried to imagine what like a Jay Caspian Kang, like like if you have that level of people following you and stuff, like, and you're, like what is that like? Like put myself in that shoes, and then but it be this character like a Javi who's like kind of like didn't get there in a way that he is proud of. Like he kind of played himself to get there. And what would that feel like? Yeah.
Yeah, it was they tricked us, into thinking that it was real and that it would really help our careers. And in some ways, they're minor helpings to one's career. But what they didn't tell you was that if you're a journalist, basically you either play the game and then also turn all your shit in on time, and then that's how you make it. It wasn't like if you're constantly exploding on social media. If you are, you might get a job, but you're gonna lose the job very quickly.
Yeah.
And that was
Yeah.
like that was the part that where and then in the process we all just got addicted to it and basically replaced any type of meaningful relationship is that you know or quality of a sense of personal pride in what you've done is good.
Hmm.
And because all the shit that you write, whether it goes viral or not, feels totally random if you really think about it,
Hmm.
then you end up basically feeling crazy at some point, right? It's like the ultimate gaslighter or something like that. Yeah, it was man, it was I was like gripped by it. My wife was like, "What are you doing?" And I was like sitting there sitting on like a my kid's bed, and I was just like, "Motherfucker."
You got me.
Yeah, this dude is fucking me up right now. I'm fucked up from this. Like, man, I just did. Yeah, it was. Anyway, cool. Is there anything else you want to? Is there anything else you want to talk about here, Tyler? I think we said 45 minutes. We're a little over. That's good, though. I mean, this is a
No, this
very
was a
fun
blast. This was super
conversation.
fun. It's a great book, really hilarious, and
Thank
yeah,
you,
I loved
man.
our chat.
Yeah, is there like stuff? It's like what's the best way for the people to order the book?
I mean, anywhere online or your bookstore, your local bookstore, bookshop, or people are, you're not supposed to say Amazon, but I know everybody gets a lot of their shit from Amazon.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
practical.
yeah.
Half my family is using,
There is
um,
like there's a definite like kind of remove where people don't put the Amazon link. We don't
yeah,
either
no, you're not
actually in our
supposed to. You're
show
like,
notes.
yeah,
Yeah,
you're
yeah, we
like,
don't, we don't.
yeah,
But
yeah.
then
No,
it's
no,
just
and
like,
I
all
and I
right,
and
yeah,
like I understand why too, but I also like the practical side of me. I'm like,
yeah,
people
yeah.
find
You'll
it.
take the Amazon. We'll all take
Yeah,
the we will take the
my
sale.
publisher will too. I'm sure. Like,
So,
when it comes each way, they're gonna take it. But yeah, but no,
hey
I
man.
I did want to say this is a real honor because I admire really a lot both of you, what you're writing, and I think that you, in a lot of ways, are doing like the best version of this stuff or have been for some time. So, I think there's the wrong way to go about it, and then there's like the path you can forge, and that's takes more courage. And so I applaud both of you because I think you do a great job.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just glad that you wrote the book because I really felt like, I was just like the novel is the. I realized I think about 50 pages in that the novel is a better way to do this than constantly whining about it through essays, right? Because there you do get trapped in the dissident thing that Tyler was talking about. I feel that way. I know Tyler feels that way, right? I think
Oh
you're
yeah,
part
yeah.
of the club now, Andrew, whether you
Oh.
want to be or not.
Oh,
But
for sure. You're on
um
the bad list, dude.
the other part of it is that like, there needs to be a way to sort of go beyond it to show the human stakes of it outside of, oh, these people's logic is bad, or
Yeah,
like these
yeah, yeah.
people are ignoring class or they're doing, the sort of arguments that we leverage in these types of debates. But um I don't know, I felt like the when Javi goes to college and starts hanging around like the Latino house, right? Like
Yeah, yeah,
on
yeah.
campus, and he meets all these people, and he's like, I've never met, these sort of white presenting Latinos from like Chile or Argentina or whatever. And then he's kind of trying to navigate it all. It's much more clear, I think, a way to explain that process, right? About class and all these types of things. Cause like, Tyler and I can just say, well, yeah, Harvard says they're committed to diversity, but who are the kids that they let in? And it's like all the kids that I'm sure you met at Cornell,
Yeah, 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 for
Yeah.
sure, for sure.
and so it was I thought it was, I don't know, I'm glad it exists, and I encourage every one of our listeners to read it. If you like this, I'll just put it this way, this isn't always true, but if you like this podcast, and I think you'll like this book. I
Totally.
think it's
Yeah, yeah,
very
yeah.
safe to
It's like
say.
tailor made for the podcast.
And so thanks for coming on the show, man. And good luck with everything. We'll have you back. I don't know if it's okay with you. We'll have you back on.
I would love
Yeah,
that,
this was a
man.
Yeah,
blast.
I would
I had
love
a
that,
whole lot
man.
of fun talking about this. So if there's anything you want to talk about or whatever, just shoot us an email. If we think that something's cool, we'll have you back on.
Man, that would be dope. I love this podcast too. So this is a true honor. Thank you.
Thank you,
All
brother.
right. Thanks, man.
All right.